Hang on a second, Mr. Beer. Someone has moved my chair up. I'll go down a bit. Fine.
May I call Roderick Ismay?
Of course.
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
Good morning, Mr. Ismay. My name is Jason Beer and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry. Can you give us your full name, please?
Roderick Mark Ismay.
Thank you for coming today to assist the inquiry in its work, and thanks also for the provision of a witness statement. We're very grateful to you. You should have in front of you a hard copy of that witness statement. It's dated the 13th of January 2023, and if you turn to the last page of it, which is page 20, you should see a signature. Is that your signature?
That is my signature.
And are the contents of that witness statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, they are.
For the purpose of the transcript, it needn't be displayed. The URN is WITN 04630100. I'm going to ask you questions today about the range of matters referred to in your witness statement, but not about certain matters that arise in phase 5 of the inquiry. In particular, I'm not going to ask you about the second site investigation, nor phase 6 of the inquiry. Can I start, please, with your career qualifications and experience? Do you have any professional qualifications that are relevant to the issues that we're going to speak about today?
So my professional qualification is a chartered accountant.
And what degree did you obtain?
Accountancy.
And when did you become a chartered accountant?
I think that was 1994 or 5.
And I think you then worked in Ernst Young, is that right?
That's correct.
And was Ernst Young at that time an accountancy, audit and management consulting firm?
Yes, it was, yes.
Over what period did you work for Ernst Young?
So I worked for Ernst Young from when I left university, which would be 1992, I think. And I worked for them for about 11 years, probably 2003.
When you joined the post office?
When I joined the post office, yes.
And what was your role in Ernst Young?
So I joined Ernst Young as an audit trainee and did my studies during the first couple of years working with Ernst Young. I worked in our Sheffield office and had a number of audit clients in the Sheffield area, spanning manufacturing businesses, pharmaceuticals, and the post office. Yeah.
And so if I divided Ernst Young's work into 3 things, accountancy, audit, and management consultancy, you were in the audit part, is that right?
I was in the audit part. There were certain times where people would work with different functions, and I did spend some time working with the management consultancy practice as well.
In the answer before last, you gave the range of clients that you worked for, and amongst those was the post office.
Yes, yes.
What work did you do for the post office when you were at Ernst Young?
So I initially was a trainee within the audit team, an audit junior, and progressed through such that I was senior manager on the post office counters audit accounts when I finished.
For how long did you work for the post office when you were at Ernst Young?
The post office would have been one of the first clients that I started working on at Ernst Young, and so probably for the tenure of my time at Ernst Young, I had post office would have been one of my clients, so that would have been about 11 years.
So for the entirety of the 11 years, at one time or another, the post office was a client
Yes.
of Ernst Young, and you were working on that account?
Yes, the post office was a client of Ernst Young throughout all my time there, and each year I would have had some involvement with the post office on the audit, yes.
Were you part of the Ernst Young team that reviewed what was called the CAPS project, in November and December 1996?
I can't remember the acronym CAPS. I don't know.
Were you part of the Ernst Young team that advised Post Office Counters Limited on a series of acceptance incidents, as they were called, in August 1999 as part of the contractual process of accepting the Horizon system?
I can't remember doing that. I don't think so, no.
In the course of that process, the acceptance period,
Yeah.
serious concerns were raised by Ernst Young over the integrity of the data that Horizon produced, such that Ernst Young felt unable to provide an unqualified opinion on the accuracy of Post Office Counters Limited accounts. Do you recall participating in that?
So I would have been involved in the Post Office Counters audit at that time. I can't remember a matter in the audit opinions relating to the Horizon system in respect of its reliability, but I can remember that the Post Office spent a lot of money on Horizon and it impaired the total value of it such that the organisation had a question about going concern. So there was a £1 billion impairment, which raised a significant, as I say, going concern question for Post Office Counters and for Royal Mail at the time. My recollection would be that any reference of concern in the audit opinions, I think would have been uncertainty related to the going concern of the organisation. I can't remember it being a narrative about the integrity of the Horizon system, but I may be wrong, I may have forgotten, but
Yes.
my recollection would be that it was the impairment and the going concern of the organisation.
This was a different issue. This was, it culminated, I'm not going into detail on this, but it culminated in a letter that we've seen a lot of, dated the 23rd of August 1999, in which Ernst Young said they were so concerned about the integrity of the data produced by Horizon that they would, if the problems persisted, be unable to sign off the accounts without expressing a qualified opinion.
So I think that we were approached by the finance director at the time with what my recollection would be a hypothetical question of, given that it was a complex system that was being deployed, a hypothetical question of if there were anomalies, would you be able to sign the accounts on an unqualified basis? And on that, so my recollection would be that that was a hypothetical question, which led to that. I don't remember that being something that manifested itself in the audit opinion in the published accounts, though.
Why was the hypothetical question being asked, to your knowledge, that if there were these problems with Horizon data, would you be able to offer an unqualified opinion? Why was the hypothetical being asked?
I think that a hypothetical was being asked because it was a very difficult contractual situation for the deployment of an enormously expensive system where the partnership between BA, the benefits agency, and Post Office Counters at the time, and the extent to which benefits were going to get paid either directly into bank accounts or through cash in Post Office Counters was an enormously complex and sensitive question for the citizens of the country at the time. And I think the Post Office, as something that my recollection would be that there was an original request for benefits to be paid on an automated basis through post offices. That kind of evolved, and there was more of a question of is it going to be paid directly into bank accounts or not. The risk of it being paid into bank accounts directly would mean that a lot of footfall into post offices would not happen, which in turn would have brought a question about the viability of the post office. That's a different thing to the integrity of the Horizon system. But I think within the sort of dynamics of the contractual conversations that were going on, the ability to table powerful statements with the suppliers and designers of the systems probably led to that question, which would give impetus to the Post Office to make sure that a robust system was designed. It would have been extra leverage amongst all the different stakeholders to say our auditors would not be happy if this system did not work, and therefore if such a situation did arise, what would your opinion be? And I think that was the context of what led to that.
And so who was asking you?
I think the question was coming from the finance director of the Post Office at the time, asking Ernst Young.
Sorry, I missed that name.
No, I think the question was coming from the finance director of the Post Office as a question to Ernst Young at the time.
Can I ask, can everyone hear Mr. Ismay all right? Because for some reason, I'm not catching every word, but if everybody else is, that's fine.
I'll move nearer the...
No, I've got a screen showing what you're saying as well. But I did wonder whether you were projecting all the...
and with respect to Mr. Ismay, he speaks a little fast. Now, bear in mind, I do sometimes. I understand the problem.
Yeah, fine.
Okay, I'll try to slow down. Apologies.
And so was the finance director of Post Office asking you in Ernst Young this question?
It was asking Ernst Young that question.
What was your involvement in the provision of an answer to the question?
I can't remember, but I expect that the question would probably have come through to the audit partner, and as the senior manager on the account, or the manager at that time, I think, I would have been consulted as part of what's the Ernst Young response going to be to that question.
Did these discussions, to your memory, involve a concern over the integrity of the data that Horizon was producing?
I think the question was if the, if I remember what you said right at the start of it, a question about a qualification you referred to at the start. So I presume that would have come from a question about the integrity. But as I say, my recollection of the actual audit opinion going into the statutory accounts was that it was more about the impairment and the going concern of the organisation that was the matter of concern and focus within the audit.
What did you learn, if anything, at this time, before you left Ernst Young, over concerns within the Post Office expressed to Ernst Young or found by Ernst Young over the integrity of the data that Horizon produced?
I haven't got a recollection of things in my Ernst Young role having come from the Post Office to say that there were concerns about the system. No. My recollection would be more about the impairment and consequently looking at income generating units within the Post Office network and the Post Office commercial side of it business to say, is there a return to profitability for the different segments of the Post Office counters organisation at the time.
So we're talking about entirely different issues. I'm talking about Ernst Young writing to the Post Office saying, we've got such concerns about the integrity of the system that you're operating that we can't offer an unqualified opinion. You're talking about the profitability of the organisation generally.
Yes, I am. So I realise that's different to your question, but I can't remember something. I can't remember a conversation about the integrity of the system at that time, leading to correspondence from Ernst Young about it that I was involved in.
In any event, you joined the Post Office in September 2003 and left in March 2016, and so served in the Post Office for 13 years.
Yes.
Is it right that in that 13-year period you undertook three main roles? Firstly, as head of risk and control.
Yes.
Between September 2003 and June 2006,
yeah.
A period of about 3 years.
Yeah.
Secondly, as head of product and branch accounting, P&BA, from June 2006 onwards.
Yeah.
And then thirdly, as your job description was head of the Finance Service Centre.
Yes.
When was that from?
I'm not sure when I'm not sure when product and branch accounting became Finance Service Centre, but somewhere between 2010 and 2014, somewhere within that period. So I continued to lead the product and branch accounting, the people who were part of the product and branch accounting team. That whole operation became part of the Finance Service Centre, and we took on certain other functions like accounts payable. It was part of a precursor to Royal Mail privatisation and separating the post office from Royal Mail. So certain transaction processing functions, if you like accounts payable, needed to be built for the post office to have on its own because it had relied on Royal Mail before. So probably the move from it being PMBA to Finance Service Centre would probably have been 2 or 3 years before Royal Mail privatisation, because it was part of that journey.
So can I deal with each of those 3 roles in turn then?
Yes.
Firstly, your work as Head of Risk and Control.
Yeah.
And as we've said, that was from September 2003 until September 2000 to June 2006. What was the nature of your role as Head of Risk and Control?
So the role, initially, I came into the organisation with 2 internal control managers. I'm not sure who they'd reported to before, but that became part of my team. But the main mandate from the finance director coming into the organisation when I took that role really was about getting ready for financial services. So I was involved in writing the final management letter from Ernst Young to the post office in my last year at Ernst Young. And one of the observations that I made in there was just a kind of routine observation that the organisation is moving into financial services, and it's going to be important that financial services compliance is a key part of the organisation moving forward. So when I joined, the finance director effectively said, your last management letter said get ready for compliance for financial services, so that's what I'd like you to do. So that dominated my job when I joined the post office, even though I'd got a title of risk and control, which did involve talking to heads of different departments in the organisation about what they saw as risks in their areas, and working with Royal Mail Group Audit to look at vital few controls audit activity, such as might be a payroll process. The bulk of my actual time, for a good amount of that time in that job, was going to seminars with the I think FSA as it was at the time, and meeting Bank of Ireland, and helping the post office to understand what its responsibilities were going to be as an appointed representative to the Bank of Ireland as it entered financial services.
If somebody asked me what I did as my job, I would say I provide legal services, I ask questions of witnesses in court,
Right.
and I write opinions
Right.
and advices.
Yeah.
Full stop. Could you translate what the answer I've just given into what you did between 2003 and 2006 for your job? In sort of a 1, 2, 3, if there are 3.
My job title was about talking to different functions around the organisation to find out what their risks were and to assess controls in their areas. That was what my job title would be. In practice, most of my time was looking at financial services compliance.
So your role was principally financial services compliance?
Yep, so for a large part of that risk and control job, it was financial services compliance.
Your title was Head of Risk. What other risks, other than financial, were within your portfolio?
Any risk that the organisation could have would be something that could come onto the risk radar and be subject to linkages to that job.
To whom did you report?
I was a direct report to the finance director.
Who was?
Who was, when I joined, that was Peter Corbett.
Did it remain Peter Corbett for the 3 years?
Yes, it did, yes.
Did you attend board meetings of Post Office Limited?
I did, I was in attendance or presenting on certain topics which were financial services related.
How frequently did you attend Post Office Limited board meetings?
Not many. I probably went to a couple of them, and I'm not actually sure whether it was Post Office Limited Board or Post Office Limited Executive Team. So the group that I was going into had got David Mills, who was Post Office Managing Director at the time, and his executive team. I wasn't in a room which had got non-executive directors in. So I may have been wrong to say that I was in board meetings. It may have been Post Office Limited Executive Team meetings that I was in.
And in that 3-year period, you think you attended a couple of times?
I think that I attended a couple of times in there, and and then that led to also a Post Office Limited Risk and Compliance Committee.
We'll come to that in a moment.
Right.
Did you prepare written reports for the Post Office Board Executive Team meetings?
I think I prepared one to do with the Bank of Ireland getting ready for financial services, yeah.
And was the format that they were tabled at such board meetings and then you would present them?
Yes, but as I say, that I'm not sure whether it was a board or
Executive
PT.
team meeting.
Yeah, but yes. And I would have just been in attendance for that part of the meeting.
When you took over the role, how many people reported to you?
When I joined, 2 people reported to me.
They're the 2 internal control managers that you spoke of earlier.
Yes.
What is an internal control manager?
A bit like an auditor. So somebody who would look at the processes within a particular function and test the controls in that area.
And how many people did they have underneath them?
None,
So you had a staff of 2.
but yes.
You say in your witness statement that the role evolved to take on responsibility for the branch audit team.
Yes.
What was the branch audit team?
That was the individuals who would go out to post office branches to conduct physical asset verification audits, which would be checking cash and stock. And they would also go out to post office branches and to post office cash centres to count cash again there, but also to perform compliance checks.
How many people were in the branch audit teams?
A lot, probably, it could have been around about 100 when I joined. So when I joined, I had 2 people. When I got the branch audit team, that came to me, that would have been about 100 people in that team.
How were the branch audit teams organised?
There was a national audit team manager who had regional managers reporting to him. So I think we had 7 regions back then. So there would have been, say, a North Thames and East Anglia, I think, individual managing a team of 7, 8, 9 people for that region. So the audit manager had got 7 reports under him, I think, and then also an individual who would have been doing risk modelling to identify where the regional audit teams would go out to do their work.
And in that structure, who reported to you?
The national manager reported to me.
And what was his or her name?
That was Martin Verlintz.
Were the teams based regionally?
Yes.
How did you supervise and manage the work of the branch audit team?
I primarily met with Martin. We talked through risk modelling, as in what pieces of data might cause us to go out to a post office branch. I didn't have that much contact with the individual branch auditors performing the audits, but most of my contact mainly was with Martin.
did you ever go out to see branch audit teams?
I met the whole of the team in that we would have had a national team communications and training day. So somewhere like Post Office had a training centre near Rugby, Coton House. I think we convened the whole of the team at some point to come together there as a sort of a training and engagement event for the team. So I would have been to a function where all of the team had the opportunity to be there. I also went out, I think I only went out to probably two audits themselves to assist the team as playing a role within the team at a branch audit and being responsible for counting part of the cash and liaising with the colleagues in branch on an actual audit.
And was that because your skills were necessary, or was it the boss showing his face?
That was for me to better understand the activity that the team were performing, yeah.
And when in the 3-year period did you take over responsibility for the branch audit team?
I think that would have been within a year of joining the post office. I'm not sure how quickly, but I think it would have been within my first year working there.
Was there, when you took over the function of Head of Risk and Control in September 2003, a Post Office Audit Committee?
When I joined, I don't think there was a Post Office Audit Committee. There was a Royal Mail Group Audit Committee, and any matters pertaining to Post Office would have been subject to that Group Audit Committee. And indeed, most of the internal audit resource was part of the Royal Mail Group internal audit team, who would look at certain things in Post Office, in Parcel Force and in Royal Mail.
Can we look, please, at poll 302-1415? Thank you. You'll see that these are the minutes of a committee called the Post Office Audit Committee.
Yes.
They're dated the 13th of March 2001, and so 2.5 years before your time.
Yes.
You'll see the list of those present, those in attendance, and those also present. And then
Yes.
if we just scroll down, you'll see some of the business dealt with. So just go back up to the top, please. This minute tends to suggest that at least in March 2001, there was a Post Office Audit Committee.
Right, let me clarify that then. So the Post Office Group changed its name several times. And there's significant confusion in many areas about what's Post Office, what's Royal Mail even now. So I think at that time, the Post Office was the Post Office Group, and the Post Office Group had got divisions, which were Post Office Counters, Royal Mail and Parcel Force, but it was called the Post Office Group. At some point, the names were reversed such that it became the Royal Mail Group, which still had the same pillars under it. So there was always Post Office Counters, which became Post Office Limited. So there was always Post Office Counters, there was always Royal Mail, there was always Parcel Force, but the overriding group name in the 90s and at this point I think was called the Post Office Group. At some point in the 2000s, that Post Office Group became called the Royal Mail Group, although it was exactly the same things, and then at some point it became called Consignia PLC, and then it went back to being called Royal Mail Group. So this document isn't Post Office Accounters or Post Office Limited Audit Committee. This is the Group Audit Committee.
And can you tell that from the list of those that are shown as being present and in attendance?
Well, yes, so Marisa Cassoni as Group Finance Director and Douglas Hill as Group Director of Financial Management makes clear to me that that was a group that was a committee that was looking at group matters.
When you joined in September 2003, were you provided with the back editions of the Audit Committee minutes, such as this one?
No, I could probably have asked for them, but no, I wasn't provided with back copies of committee minutes, no.
You were taking over an audit function.
Yes.
Did you not see which issues the Audit Committee, even if it was the group, had been considering in the recent past, and how the Audit Committee had sought to address them?
I didn't, and in hindsight that may have been something that I should have asked, but I very much had a mandate to look at financial services regulatory compliance when I joined, and so the focus and the mandate from the finance director and indeed from those ET meetings that I went into was all about regulatory compliance when I started. Even though my role picked up the network audit team, the individual mandates and most frequent questions to me were about how do we get on the path to regulatory compliance.
After you joined in September 2003, did the what you call the Group Audit Committee continue?
Yes, I think the Group Audit Committee continued, I think, yeah.
Did you attend the Group Audit Committee?
I think I only attended one Group Audit Committee.
So were you by invitation then?
Yes.
How often did that Group Audit Committee meet?
I don't know. I would expect it was quarterly, but I don't know.
Do you know whether there were written terms of reference for it?
I would expect so, but I don't know. Well, I would expect that there would have been.
Do you know how that Audit Committee reported back to the Post Office Board? Whether that was the board of Post Office Counters Limited or then as it became Post Office Limited?
I don't know what the mechanism was for the group audit. The group Post Office Limited directors would have received messages from the Group Audit Committee. I'm not sure exactly what medium, whether that was an agenda item at a Pol-ET or a dedicated audit relationship meeting. But I know there would have been dialogue. There would have been a governance process for how those would interact, but I can't remember what that governance process was.
We also have some minutes, I'm not going to show them to you, of something called an Audit and Risk Committee of the Royal Mail Holdings plc. Is that different from this Group Audit Committee?
I don't know whether that was a change in name of this committee. As I say, this Post Office, the group changed its name between Post Office and Royal Mail. The particular titles of committees sometimes changed without the committee itself changing, but as a better acknowledgement of what the scope of that committee was. So it could well have been the same committee, most likely was.
Does it follow that by the time you joined in September 2003, there wasn't a dedicated Post Office Limited audit committee?
Yes, that's right. For the Post Office Limited company in isolation, there wasn't an audit committee for that specific limited company, no.
We know that at some point an entity called the Risk and Compliance Committee was formed.
Yes,
Of which company was that a committee?
Post Office Limited.
When was it formed?
Sometime during the tenure of my 2003 to 2006 role, probably 2005.
Why was it formed?
Well, I think I said in one of those ET meetings that I went to that in a governance sense, it would be beneficial for the organisation to have got its own audit committee. And I think the agreement of that Post Office Limited ET was that was going to turn into the Post Office Limited Risk and Control Committee that you just mentioned.
When you joined, was it striking to you that the Post Office did not have a risk audit or client compliance committee?
No, I think when I joined, because it was an integrated group, it would be common for an integrated group to have got one group audit function. And so I don't think it was unusual for a group of companies just to have one group audit function. But the journey for the Post Office Group or the Royal Mail Group for 30 years has been one of will there or will there not be part of this organisation privatised? And therefore there had been comings and goings of how should Post Office Capital Limited possibly separate itself within that that scenario. And so I think the idea of Post Office Limited getting its own audit committee back in, if it was 2005, was probably appropriate given the continued national debate about would one or more parts of the Post Office Royal Mail Group be privatised.
How often did the Risk and Compliance Committee, once it was created, sit?
I think that met quarterly.
Did it report back to Post Office Limited's main board?
I think the papers from it would have gone back to the board.
So copies of the minutes, is that right?
The minutes, yes, yes.
Was that the only means of communication back to the main board?
I think that was the formal mechanism back to the board. The Post Office Limited Risk and Compliance Committee had got the then chairman of the organisation, so I think Sir Mike Hodgkinson. So he was the chair for that committee, and he would have been on the board, as would the finance director who was in attendance at that committee. So I think those two individuals would have been both in the Risk and Compliance Committee and in the board. And therefore that would have been a means of communication as well.
That document can come down from the screen. How frequently did you attend the newly formed Risk and Compliance Committee?
I think most of the meetings, unless I was on holiday, I think I would have attended all of them because I was involved in preparing the agenda for those committees. So up until I moved into the product and branch accounting team, I think I would have attended all.
Everyone barring holiday?
Yes, I think so.
Did the Risk and Compliance Committee have terms of reference?
Yes, I think we did have a terms of reference when we set up.
Was it a decision-making body?
No, I don't think it was a decision-making body. I think it was one that would give views on information that was submitted to it, but it wasn't a body that had, say, a delegated authority to make expenditure decisions.
Or any other decisions?
I don't think so.
You said that it instead made recommendations.
Yeah.
To whom did it make recommendations?
I think those recommendations would have been what would have gone to Post Office Limited executive team.
Can we look, please, at poll 304 7544? If we just scroll down a little bit so we can catch the heading of the document, thank you. You'll see that this is a branch auditing report for period 6 in the financial year 2004 to 2005. It's dated the 29th of October 2004. It's from Martin Furlink, who you mentioned, and is that his full job title, National Audit and Inspections Manager?
Yes, yes.
And it's to, amongst other people, you, Head of Risk and Control?
Yes, yep.
If we look in paragraph 1, we'll see that the report makes clear that its first purpose is to inform your work in a report that you were to prepare to the Post Office Board or the Executive Committee as appropriate, and to the newly formed Compliance Committee. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
And if we go down to the executive summary in 2, it reads, the total of all cash account losses revealed at audit in the first 6 months of the year has amounted to £2.8 million from approximately 1,000 audits, while the shortages revealed at the majority of these audits would be made good by the sub-postmaster or might be rectified by error notices. £1.9 million of the total amount is based on the findings of just 20 branches audited. Although in some of these cases there were indications of errors being made which would be rectified by an error notice, there's also a significant risk that the losses identified in most of these cases will not be recovered. It's also a concern that in spite of the size of the amounts of discrepancies, a precautionary suspension was not made in 35% of these cases. So first 6 months of the year, losses of £2.8 million revealed at audit. Yes? £1.9 million of the total attributed to 20 branches audited. Significant risk that the losses will not be recovered. Then if we go to the end of that paragraph there, in spite of the size of the amount, a precautionary suspension wasn't made in 35% of the cases. You were responsible for the branch audit teams at this time, yes?
Yes.
And can we take from this summary of the losses that it had been discovered on audit that a suggestion was made that discernible errors had been made by postmasters in some cases?
Yes.
That those errors could be rectified by error notices and followed up by a payment by the sub-postmaster?
So I believe the audit team would have checked with the product and branch accounting team at the time if there were error notices pending, and therefore there would be an understanding that that wouldn't actually be a shortage in the round if an error notice was known to be on its way to resolve it. But if product and branch accounting didn't have any knowledge of any error notices that were going to be on the way to the branch, then the shortage identified at audit would be deemed to hold true in the round because there wasn't any error notices expected to offset it.
Can we also take it from this summary that some of the losses discovered at audit could not be explained by discernible errors?
Yes,
In fact, most of them.
quite possibly. And the reason that the understanding of me and of the audit team at the time was that money had been stolen, and that one can't identify a discernible error that has caused the money not to be there. If it happened that a sub-postmaster or a member of staff employed by a sub-postmaster, or if a door had been left open and a customer had managed to take money out of the till, there isn't going to be an error notice, there isn't going to be an error that defines that. It's an example of theft.
But the concern that's expressed that the losses won't be recovered is because on audit, the majority of the losses couldn't be explained by discernible errors.
Well, you can't explain theft.
Is that the mental process that you went to? If there's not a discernible error, it must be theft.
That was a possible scenario in the audits, and sometimes, as has been referred to in some of the documents in the packs that I've received, there have been statements that an individual confessed at the time the auditors went in, and I'm aware of audit team members having said to me that they went into a branch and somebody would say to them, I'm grateful that you've come to conduct this audit because I've been paying off a debt and I can't go on like this. And I've been using money to pay off a debt. And that was in a small number of branches. So as an organisation, you know, we we're passionate about our sub-postmaster community and our network of branches, but in some of our Crown offices and in some of the sub-post offices, sadly there were some situations where individuals admitted, or members of staff of individuals admitted that they'd taken money, and sometimes one couldn't believe that a trusted member of staff may have taken something, but you've got the reference to Blackwood here, and my recollection from Blackwood was that that office was co-located with a sorting office, I think, or a delivery office. And I think my recollection is that the audit report noted that the door was left open between that post office and the delivery office next door, and that the safe wasn't always shut, and therefore a scenario where £436,000 was identified as a loss at audit, there was a clear risk that unidentified individuals had come through an open door to an open safe and taken batches of money from it, and there would not be an accounting error for anybody to identify which would lead to that. It was simply an open safe that someone may have taken the money from.
In the answers you've just given, you have suggested, would this be right, that in the absence of a discernible error, the assumption was that losses were caused by a postmaster's conduct, whether that was accidental or deliberate?
Yes, that was the belief in a number of cases, yes.
And is that why the report in that last sentence on the first paragraph there expresses a concern that the postmaster wasn't suspended in 35% of the cases, i.e., it's got to be down to them, they should have been suspended?
I think that was the...
That's the implication, isn't it?
That is the implication, yes.
Did it ever occur to you or anyone else that applied their brain to the issue that the losses might not be caused by postmaster conduct?
It occurred to us that it could be caused by a third party other than the sub-postmaster having taken the money. It could have been a trusted member of staff, or in the situation that I described, that I believe from my recollection was the situation at Blackwood, where an open door and an open safe could have had a number of unidentified individuals having access to that safe.
But it was always down to the postmaster in some way, a loss?
Under the sub-postmaster contract, yes.
No. That's a separate issue about financial and legal responsibility for losses. I'm not going to spend time working through with you whether that was a correct interpretation of the contract or not. But as a matter of fact, your belief and the belief of those around you was all losses, unless we can see what the error was, are down to the conduct of a sub-postmaster in some way.
Yeah, ultimately it was the responsibility of the sub-postmaster.
That's not quite the question he's asking you, Mr. Ismay.
Okay.
I think what he's trying to get from you is an acceptance, if you do accept it, that your thought processes in 2004 was that these losses were caused by human activity, either accidentally on the part of sub-postmasters or their staff, or deliberately.
Oh, that's correct, yes.
And that was your explanation for all these losses?
Yes, that was the thought
Right,
process,
yeah.
Yes, thank you, yeah.
And it didn't occur to you or anyone around you that there may be system faults that are causing the losses?
My understanding from the IT teams was that they didn't think there was a foundation to the allegations that were made. So at this time, as documents in this pack indicate the Cleveley's case, for example, had happened 4 or 5 years before this document. It's known that the Cleveley's case involved some allegations about the system, but I think the documents here say that there was a lack of system records to substantiate the case going forward, and that's led to the outcome of that one. But so in my role when I joined as head of risk and control, I did ask a question into the IT team of, well, look, if we've got this allegation being made, is this, is there a foundation to this? And the very strong view coming to me from colleagues in the IT team at that time was that that there was no foundation to the allegation that had been made in the Cleveley's case.
And was that just a conversation?
Yes.
And is that the way audits normally work? Somebody who's responsible for an IT system, you say to them, somebody's alleged your IT system isn't working properly and is causing financial errors. And they say back to you, no, it's not. And you say, oh, okay then.
Well, for me, coming in with the structure of team that I'd got as I joined and not having an IT auditor, there wasn't an alternative to doing that. But I was also looking at it in the context of the organisation had put a lot of project management into the whole deployment of the IT system, a lot of specialists involved. The report that gets referred to with my name from 2010, I, in there, referred to something that IT had told me about of the Gartner report, which was not something that I conducted, not something that I would have understood the technicalities of what the Gartner specialists were looking at, but which had said that, that made positive comments about the deployment of the system. And therefore, I was operating in an environment where I asked the IT team, is there a basis to these allegations? And they said no. And I'd also got the message that there'd been all these specialists involved in working through the design and deployment of the system. And clearly the material that you're now showing me does mention lots of issues that were identified during the procurement and design and deployment of the system. I wasn't aware of all of those things. I was aware of a context where there'd been a lot of IT specialists involved in the deployment of it, and that a go live had been taken on the basis of trusted testing of it.
So your state of mind was informed, you say, by the things that said the system was working well. You hadn't been shown any of the things that we now know exist to show that there were, putting it neutrally, issues with the integrity of the data that it produced.
Yes, I was receiving stuff talking about the positives of why there were reasons to rely on the system and that it worked. And so I didn't see something that said, well, what was it that was alleged in the Cleveley's case and how was that tackled? How was that responded to rebut it? I didn't see that. But I was assured by the team in IT that it was that there wasn't a foundation to it.
Who in IT gave you that assurance?
I would have been speaking to, so David Smith was the head of IT at the time. It would have been somebody, him or somebody in his team I would have spoken to.
Was there a risk register?
Each department had got a risk register. IT had got a risk register. I don't recall that this was something that was recorded as a risk on that register.
So IT didn't have the Horizon system on its risk register. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Did you, as head of audit, maintain a risk register?
I didn't maintain a risk register other than what was collated out of what individual departments had got, and a discussion with them about what was on their risk registers.
So you maintain sort of a super risk register, is that right?
Yes.
For the company?
Yes.
Post Office Limited?
Post Office Limited, yes.
Was the Horizon system on that super risk register?
I don't think it was, no.
What research or inquiry did you undertake to determine whether the Horizon system should be on the risk register or should not be on the risk register?
Because I was aware of the allegations that had been made in Cleveland, because that had been reported in Computer Weekly. And I received, I think, there was a press cutting service within the organisation, so I would have received press cuttings, I think, in the organisation that would have highlighted there has been this article and this allegation. As I say, I asked David or somebody in his team what was there a basis to this. I'm having a meeting with the IT, some people in the IT team about their risk register, and so I know I asked something at that time about, well, given the allegations being made, should there be a risk here? And the response was very firmly that there wasn't a foundation to that allegation.
Was there anything more systematic than that in the maintenance by you of a risk register? When I say than that, I mean reading an article in Computer Weekly which makes an allegation and speaking to the head of IT who says there's nothing in it.
I'm sure I had a more detailed conversation than I'm describing there, but I can't remember the spec of what we went into.
Were there regular tabled meetings where you would pull in the heads of department and say, let's look at your risk register, let's interrogate them, let's pick apart why things are and aren't on those risk registers?
Yeah, I think I probably had, well, thinking about the cycle for the Risk and Compliance Committee, which was quarterly, I think I would have had a meeting with a senior representative out of the marketing team, the IT team, the network team, all the 7 or 8 divisions of the post office. I would have met them quarterly before compiling a paper into the Compliance and Risk Committee.
And it was a conversation with the head of IT that meant that the Horizon system never entered any risk register.
Yeah.
Can we look, please, at poll 302-1416? You'll see that these are the minutes of a Risk and Compliance Committee for the 5th of January 2005. I think we can see that you gave your apologies.
Yes, yeah.
And if we just scroll down, please. Item 0301, investigate, these are action points, investigate how sub-postmasters' appointment and suspension and reappointment process can be improved to reduce risks, lessons learned from the Sandback case, to include developing our own internal pool of interim branch managers. Tony asking to supply an update to the forum on the Turners Hill case to be sent to Bob Wigley, and the like. And if we carried on looking, I'm not going to spend time doing it, we can see that from these minutes and other minutes of the Risk and Compliance Committee, the Risk and Compliance Committee was considering the specifics of individual investigations involving sub-postmasters and lessons learned from those investigations. Is that a fair reflection of part of the work of the Risk and Compliance Committee?
Yes, it is.
And so it was usual for this committee to consider individual cases?
Yes, it did.
The first action, as we've seen, is to investigate how appointment and suspension processes can be improved to reduce risk. Was that, in fact, seen as a risk to the post office at the time, that sub-postmasters were the risk and greater control was needed of them through the suspension process?
I think the risk that was seen was that post officers increasingly had a retail side, and there was a risk that the retail side of the branch may not be that financially successful. I think there'd been examples where, and not necessarily just individual postmasters, but there might have been a franchise partner that the organisation worked with. And there have recently been large franchise organisations who've experienced financial difficulty. And what was being looked at here, I think, was to say, are we, and we should be doing credit checks on the organisation, which, as I say, might be a limited company franchise. It might be a significant multiple partner that we were looking at, not just a sub-postmaster, although the phrase is sub-postmaster here. But it was saying, how effectively are we doing business credit checks on the organisations to which a franchise is going to be given to run a post office? Because if we take on a contract with a business partner which has got financial difficulties, that potentially creates a risk to going to use working capital out of the post office side to prop up the shop side.
So I think the answer to my question is yes, that the risk to the organisation was seen as coming from dishonest sub-postmasters.
From financially challenged partners, not necessarily just sub-postmasters. As I say, there were major national multiple partners that the post office worked with, and you will have seen in the press in the last few years some of these major national organisations have experienced financial difficulties.
This refers to sub-postmasters and their
does.
suspension, doesn't it?
It does, but I think the process that was being worked on was wider than just sub-postmasters.
Can we look at page 3 of these minutes, please? And look at the foot of the page at 3.3.3. Internal crime. Tony Utting gave a broad overview of the team dynamics for internal crime. There are over 600 cases at present, spread over 39 organisations. Financial investigations, freezing of proceeds of crime were discussed, and issues around Home Office training. £1.2 million recovered so far this year. An overview of the security features of Post Office card account was discussed. DWP, cash checks and liabilities were discussed. New risk model for profiling sub-postmasters was discussed. Can you help the inquiry, please, with what the new risk model for the profiling of sub-postmasters was, please?
So that would have been, when you asked me about the structure of the national audit team, when I said there was an individual separate to the regional teams who would have been looking at risk modelling, I think this was looking at what was going on there. And so the factors that would influence the audit team to go out to a post office would have included various items of data. And this last line here was a comment about what pieces of data were going into that exercise. So, for example, if there had been, through central checks being conducted, something about checks not arriving at the check processing centre, or examples of post office saving stamps missing from pouches coming in, counterfeit checks being encashed, any indications of some perhaps customer complaints, there'd be a number of pieces of data which would be weighted and would then come up with a prompt to say there's a higher score attributed to these branches from all these different bits of data. So it wasn't about profiling a sub-postmaster as such, it was about looking at the data and perhaps customer complaints related to a post office branch, which would include Crown post offices, to say, based on that data, this location is one that we think we need to send the audit team out to.
Who was responsible for writing the new risk model for the profiling of sub-postmasters?
There was somebody in Martin's team who was leading that. I can't remember the name of the person, but somebody in his team had got that data set.
Did this approach of profiling sub-postmasters and reviewing the process to reduce the risk that they might present through the use of the suspension process dovetail with the concurrent rollout of the impact programme?
No, it was totally separate.
Nothing to do with the impact programme and in the impact programme, debt recovery being prioritised.
No, this is totally separate to that.
So there are two things. We've seen and heard a lot of evidence about one of the drivers for the impact programme was to reduce debt and to seek to recover more of it from sub-postmasters. That was going on within the organisation. Then separately, this was going on as a different piece of work, one unrelated to the other.
No, they were totally separate. There may have been some of the same people involved in both of them, but this one in isolation could actually have led to more debt being identified. So,
And more recovered,
well, this
using the Proceeds of Crime Act, for example.
risk profiling would lead to more being identified. This risk profiling could lead to more debt being identified. Risk profiling itself would not lead to a chance of more recovery. But yes, the powers under the Proceeds of Crime Act would have potentially enabled more debt to be recovered. But the risk model itself was purely about identifying issues in branches, not about the recovery of them.
Was the number of investigations tracked as part of the Risk and Compliance Committee?
I don't know.
You'll see that
it clearly is a number of. I don't think there was a metric presented to that committee to say this is how many we've done this month, but this paragraph is an example of some metrics being presented to it. But I don't think that was kind of on a formal, let's keep looking at that every month basis.
Can you recall whether, you obviously weren't present at this meeting, but outside of it, any concern was raised over there being 600 cases being investigated?
Yes, there would have been concern that, yeah, I mean, I don't think any organisation would want to have got a large number of any investigations going on.
Had there historically been investigations at this level?
I believe that there'd always been investigations that had been going on, going back into the cash accounts world pre-Horizon being deployed. Yes.
Was the level or the number of investigations seen as telling you something about the Post Office? You said that there would have been concern at any investigation into staff. Was the number of them seen as a metric or as a measure of that concern?
I don't think that the number was seen as a metric on a scale, if you like. There wasn't like a threshold that said this is a concern and this is even more of a concern. But I think that no organisation would really want to have got one investigation going on. 600 clearly would be even more unsettling, but that's not to say that 200's acceptable, 600's it's just 600's a big number.
Was any attempt made to unpick or investigate why there was a big number?
Yeah, I think there was reflections such as there would be data collated, and I think some of that data is referred to in one of the tables that went into that report that I summarised in 2010. So there was a table of metrics of things coming out of that. Can you ask me the question again? Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
Was there any investigation into, you said this was a concerning high number.
Yeah, yes.
Was there any investigation into whether it had changed from the past, gone upwards or downwards, and if so, what the causes of the high number of investigations were?
No, I don't think there was. Looking at this, with what I can remember, I think it's just 600 was a big number. I can't remember a conversation about it used to be 500. What's happened? I think this was purely looking at it's 600. That's a big number.
This also speaks about freezing the proceeds of crime, and £1.2 million had been recovered in a part year. Was that seen as a success by the Post Office in recovering £1.2 million?
No, I think that's a factual statement of what was received. I don't think anybody was like taking joy out of any figure like that by any means. It was a sad situation, everything involved with it.
This refers to issues around Home Office training about either financial investigations and or proceeds of crime. Can you remember what they were, the concerns or the issues?
I don't know what the issues were around Home Office training, no. I think the Post Office investigators had to perform something under the legislation that followed on from 9/11. There was some sort of national organisation that would do training to whatever organisations had got financial investigators, and I could only imagine that there was so much demand that that it was perhaps hard to book a training slot because there was so much demand for.
If we go over the page, we can see there's an action to inform Sir Mike. Is that Sir Mike Hodgkinson,
Yes, that is.
the then chair of Post Office Limited?
Yes.
Of the Home Office contact, if support's required to speed up training for financial investigators. Was this part of a push to recover money from sub-postmasters?
Yes, it was part of a push to recover from the cases that had been investigated. Yes.
Can we turn to poll 302 1417, please? We can see minutes of the meeting on the 6th of April 2005, and we can see that you're present on this occasion. We can see at the top of page 2 the progress of the actions from the meeting I've just spoken about. 301, investigate how sub-postmasters' appointment and suspension, a reappointment process can be improved to reduce risk. Lessons learned from Sandbach case to include developing our own internal pool of interim branch managers, etc. Status ongoing, paper to board. In the action there, it's been added in to develop our own internal pool of interim branch managers from auditors, trainers, DMB staff, potential to widen scope and use rapid deployment team. Can you please explain what the rapid deployment team was, please?
No, I can't remember what the rapid deployment team was. No.
Have you any memory of such a team?
I haven't, but the Post Office experienced several periods of industrial action, and I would imagine that a team with that name would have perhaps been part of sort of business continuity planning, thinking if we've got a strike in our Crown offices, how do we enable customer service to continue? So I know I was called at some point to go and work on the counter in a number of Crown offices during strike action. I don't think that was called a rapid deployment team, but the nature of it was a rapid response to strike action.
Amongst those who are going to go in and essentially run a branch are auditors and trainers.
Yes.
Was there any concern raised about using your auditors to go in and run branches, or to use trainers to run branches?
No, I think the reason that auditors and trainers were suggested here is that they would have been the people with most understanding of the processes in a branch, and therefore the most competent people to ensure that customer service continued in the branches effectively.
We see that the action for Sir Mike is recorded as completed. And if we go forwards, please, to page 4 of the minute. It's under 3.4.5, the minutes record under corporate risk register, reviewed current risk register and discuss any movement of risks and causes. Firstly, the current risk register, is that what we've described as the super risk register maintained by you?
Yes.
And it says that you discussed any movement.
Yes.
Was a record kept of the Risk and Compliance Committee's decisions on movement of risk?
I would think so.
Where?
Well, I'd have thought if a risk had moved, that would be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. But
So does this... I'm sorry.
Evidently there isn't any here, so
No.
I don't know where it got recorded.
So this we should take to be a record of a discussion that resulted in no movement.
I think that the recollection is that the things that were on the risk register pretty much stayed in the same position in terms of impact and likelihood. And this risk register was one that had probably got between 10 and 20 things in a heat map shape on it. It would have things like continuity of social network payments or other major financial matters to the organisation, and I think the position of those on that risk register in terms of their impact and their likelihood wasn't changing very much. I think the risk register tended to be quite a similar document because those things that the organisation deemed to be the biggest risks were always inherently going to be the biggest risks to the organisation and weren't going to change that much between the cycle of committees.
So the risk remained static over time for your 3 years, is that right?
I think the things that were on that register probably did remain static. Yeah, yes.
There's a discussion, it seems, recorded adjacently in paragraph 3.4.6 about access to Horizon under the heading Information System Security. Can you see that?
Yes, I can, yeah.
Can you recall discussions, whether at this meeting or in your 3 years, about improper or unauthorised access to the Horizon system?
The thing that I can remember, and I think this is the exclusive thing that I can remember on that, because it was the only thing that I was aware of at the time, was of auditors going into post office branches and seeing passwords written on the wall, and therefore the sharing of passwords between colleagues in Crown offices and in sub-post office branches. This topic, I think, was concern about access to Horizon by people sharing passwords in branches. And that was a sort of a thing in an alleged situation of missing money in a branch. The sharing of passwords, if there was a transaction that was inappropriate in a branch, and as I said earlier, there isn't a transaction for money being stolen. You can't find a transaction for money being stolen. But if there was a transaction that had been put in that was an inappropriate transaction, it is not possible to identify who the individual was where people share passwords and user IDs. And our concern here was that it was very clear that many branches had got user IDs and passwords on the wall.
And so again, the focus is on sub-postmasters doing things wrong.
And in Crown officers, yes.
Was there any, in your 3 years in this post, discussion about Fujitsu employees having unrestricted and unauditable access to the Post Office Horizon system?
I didn't believe that individuals had got access to do transactions in the system, and therefore there wasn't conversation about that, because I was advised by IT that individuals didn't have the ability to do transactions in the system, that it was purely colleagues at the front on the Horizon counter who got the chance to do systems.
Just stopping there, breaking that answer down, how did the conversation between you and IT arise? Why were you having a conversation about backdoor access by Fujitsu?
Because of going back to such things as the Cleveley's, the allegations that were coming out of the Cleveley's report.
And again, was this part of the same conversation with the head of IT?
Yeah.
And he said, no, there is no such access, and you said, great. Is that how it went?
Yes.
Thank you very much. That would be a convenient moment.
Fine. 15 minutes, Mr.
Yes, please. I think that's 35 past.
35 past. Right, jolly good. Or
Thank you very
25 too.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, Mr. Beale.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Ismay, before we move on, can we just go back and check one thing, please? Can we look, please, at poll 302 9282? This was a document that we looked at yesterday with a Fujitsu employee called Steve Parker, who you'll see mentioned as a contributor to this document. You'll see that it's, from the top left, it's a Fujitsu document, and that it's dated the 18th of March 2004. So it's within the period that we're looking at the moment of your tenure in risk and compliance of between 2003 and 2006. I'm not going to go through the document because we looked at it extensively yesterday. It sets out the nature and extent of Fujitsu's access in what has been described as remote access or backdoor access to the Horizon system. And if we look at the what's at the foot of the page as we see it now, a point picked up by the chair yesterday, it's distributed to John Bruce of Post Office Limited. Do you know who Mr. Bruce was?
No.
Is that a name entirely unfamiliar to you?
I don't know that name at all, no.
If, as some of our other records suggest, he was an implementation manager for releases into Horizon, releases about Horizon, would that be within the IT department, as you've called it?
Yes, I think so.
If this record is accurate, that this document setting out the extent of remote access at least went over to Mr. Bruce, what would you expect the chain to be in order for you in risk and compliance to know about it? How would this get from Mr. Bruce to you?
I don't know if it would.
Why wouldn't it?
Because there were so many projects and so many documents that there'll be thousands of documents that never came anywhere near me or any of my team.
Okay, what about the issue then, rather than the document itself? If, let's assume for the moment, there were documents that were circulating which suggested that Fujitsu had privileged access to counters that permitted changes to financial data to be made, and that they were, that privileged access was unauditable, you would, I think, regard that as a risk to the integrity of the system.
Yes.
and therefore information about which you should know, being head of risk.
Yeah.
Assuming such documents existed, how would you expect the information or the issue to get from, once it entered post office, through, say, this route to somebody who is an implementation manager, to get back to you in risk?
Well, as I say, there were so many documents that there wouldn't be something that would cause me to have said, can I have a particular document like this? I think
I'm not asking that.
Yeah, but I think it would depend on the gentleman who's named in here, if he was aware that this was something that he should escalate to somebody. So first off, if he was the only recipient in post office, then potentially nobody else in post office might have known if he was the only recipient. There'd be a dependency on, did it occur to him that he ought to escalate it to somebody? Given that
Just stopping there.
Yes.
That sounds, if I may say so, a rather shaky system of risk and compliance, that it all depends on an individual realising that they must escalate something. Wasn't there a more systematic approach by which departments would ask people to contribute on a cyclical basis to an assessment of whether there were risks of which they were aware, and then they were fed back centrally to you?
I think if the organisation had got a risk, then it would be conveyed. If the organisation had acknowledged the risk, then and if, for example, if I'd then communicated to department heads that I was concerned about a particular risk, I'd expect that to be message to be conveyed to trigger things to come back up. But I understood that there wasn't a foundation to the allegations that were being made from the questions that we talked about earlier today. Therefore, I wouldn't have been asking for sight of documents. And I think operational change procedures, I think there were many documents that would have been like this, and the organisation would have had empowered individuals in some areas who were expected to just get on with the thing that they were dealing with. Clearly, I acknowledge the enormity of the matter that you're referring to that is touched on in this document, as you've suggested. That probably puts this on a different scale. But in isolation, there would be many programme managers and members of project teams who would be the person dealing with that particular area. And I don't think projects in lots of companies would expect every document to be shared with different people in the team when somebody's got a defined role in a team to get on and do something.
Thank you, I'll move on. That can come down. You were in charge of audit between perhaps 2004 and 2006 when you took on branch audit responsibilities. What was your assessment of the attitudes prevalent amongst auditors so far as sub-postmasters were concerned in that period?
My understanding from speaking to the team was that I sensed that they had good relations with sub-postmasters. Clearly, one isn't going to have good relations after a situation perhaps where a shortage is identified, but the post office audit team were going out to many branches. It was a minority of branches where issues arose, and members of the team, when I did meet some of them, would say, well, you know, I've gone out to a branch and they've said, oh, hello, we're pleased to see you again. You're out for your routine audit again. And they'd kind of described a pleasant rapport with colleagues in branches that they went out to.
Have you listened to or read or seen a summary of the human impact evidence that the inquiry heard last year as to the way in which sub-postmasters say they were treated by auditors?
No, I haven't.
We've heard evidence from them that suggested that auditors did not approach their task with an open mind, that they sought to prove fault and were unwilling to listen to the accounts that sub-postmasters gave. Are those attitudes that you recognise?
No, I think that's disappointing.
But was there, in your time, in the 3 years that you held this role, a policy document that governed the way in which audits were to be conducted? For example, the need to keep an open mind and the duty to follow all reasonable lines of investigation?
I don't know if there was a policy document like that, but if you take the institute that I'm a member of, things like independence and objectivity are core things that are part of the principles of the mindset.
Were all of the auditors members of your institute?
No, they weren't. No.
And so if there wasn't a policy document which governed the way in which audits were to be conducted, why wasn't there?
I don't know if there was or wasn't, and I appreciate that's not a very good answer. I can't remember whether there was a policy document or not.
Was it recognised by you as the head of audit that audits were the foundation quite often for criminal investigations and then criminal proceedings?
Yes.
Was there at that time a policy that the auditors were required to have regard to about the conduct of their work because they knew that it would lead to or may lead to a criminal investigation?
I think auditors were expected to follow standard record-keeping procedures for what they went out to, and I would have, whilst I don't know whether there was a policy document or not, I would have expected them to be polite, diplomatic, helpful, open-minded when they went out to do the audits. But clearly you're explaining there's been harrowing feedback that they weren't.
I'm going to take an example from much later on after your time and just ask you whether you recall anything similar. Can we look, please, at poll 303 8853? If we just scroll down a little bit, please. You'll see that this is a policy concerned with the conduct of criminal investigations. It's dated August 2013 and owned by the head of security operations. That's a different division, essentially, from your own, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Security operations. We'll see that this is version 2, 0.2, but I think we can see from the revision history at the foot of the page that even version 0.1 was dated the 16th of August 2013. And it seems that this policy for the conduct of criminal investigations was written up for the first time, as far as we can see, in 2013. To your knowledge, was there an earlier policy that documented the approach that should be taken to audits which may lead to criminal investigations?
I can't remember whether there was or wasn't one before then.
Can we just look at some of what was being said in 2013 and whether it reflected the position in your time? Can we look at page 11, please? Appreciating this is directed at the security manager and not auditors. The policy tells readers that the security manager must not overlook the fact that a fair investigation is there to establish the truth as well as substantiate the allegation. So it's important that any evidence uncovered that may support the subject's position is also recovered. It's important to document every action, decision and reason for decisions being made during the course of the investigation. Do you think similar guidance to that would have been given to your auditors back in between 2003 and 2006?
Well, I would hope so. I would hope that a balanced approach was there, yeah, to be open-minded to and to be recording evidence either way.
Do you see anything wrong if it did reflect the approach that auditors would take back in the day with what's written there?
Well, I feel like looking at that it would be enough to say a fair investigation is to establish the truth, full stop.
Yes, because it's reminding people that they shouldn't overlook that an investigation's there to establish the truth.
Yeah.
I mean, presumably there would never be any risk of that being overlooked by your auditors.
Well, I would think that the all-embracing thing is to establish the truth, and if the truth happens to substantiate the allegation, well, that's a subset of establish the truth, and it probably should have had a full stop after establish the truth.
It says that the individual must not overlook the fact that a fair investigation is there to establish the truth, as well as substantiate the investigation. Would you understand what that's what an investigation was for, to substantiate the allegation?
Well, I think that an investigation would have been triggered because there was an allegation, and the allegation, presumably, in this criminal justice policy would be that there had been a example of theft alleged. So the investigation would have been initiated as a result of an allegation, but I would have thought the policy then should be to go to wherever one needs to go to examine the evidence, and that the policy should be to establish the truth, full stop. I don't know why the policy needs to remind people as well as to substantiate the allegation.
It also says it's important that any evidence uncovered that may support the subject's position is also recovered. Would that suggest to you a rather passive process? If you come across anything that helps the suspect, retain it. It doesn't actually suggest that you should actually look for any evidence that points away from the suspect, does it?
Well, no, I guess if I was writing that, I feel like it ought to say the security manager must not overlook the fact that a fair investigation is there to establish the truth, full stop. And I would expect somebody to understand that establishing the truth means gathering all the evidence, whatever direction the evidence supports.
And the things that you've just said, how was that made clear to the very many auditors for which you were responsible back in 2003 to 2006?
Well, I would like to think that that would be the sort of thing that we would have been saying in the training events where I alluded to getting people together. I'd like to think that there might have been a policy that referred to that, but I can't remember if there was one. But I would like to think that an approach of objectivity would have been in place for conducting audits.
Can we look, please, at poll 3090437? If you forgive me a moment, I've just had a file collapse. And can we turn to the second page, please? We understand this is a Post Office Investigation Division file. Would you ever have seen such files?
I didn't routinely get files sent to me to look at.
Whether routinely or not, would you get files sent to you?
No. At some point, I asked to see a file. I think when we were going through into the second site investigation, there was a branch that I asked to see a file for then, but I wouldn't have been sent files routinely, no. So I wasn't sent files, I don't think. I wasn't sent files.
Can I go to a document that's within this file, please? It's at page 87. It's an email from Tony Utting to John Cole, copied to Keith Baines, of the 2nd of March 2006. And I think that's a period when you were still head of risk and compliance.
Yes.
If we just read it, the subject is analyst resource for civil litigation cases. John, as discussed the other day, I do believe this is a job that could that could be usefully conducted within our team for a number of reasons. Positive stuff. Our investigators routinely have to acquire and examine horizon transaction data as part of their criminal investigation and prosecution work, and are therefore familiar with not only looking at and analysing the data, but can also prepare their own witness statements in support of the evidence they uncover. Because we also have strong ties with the security and audit function within Fujitsu, we're also able to take witness statements from them in support of prosecution cases and could use the same links in support of civil matters. Indeed, the standard statements that they currently provide to us in prosecution cases were originally drafted with support from our team. I believe our contract states they will provide support in this area. And so this is, would you read this, Mr. Utting making a pitch essentially for his team to have some more staff so they can support civil litigation against sub-postmasters as well as in criminal prosecutions.
Yes, it looks like that, yes.
And he makes the point here, we've seen they've got good links with security and audit within Fujitsu. And if we scroll down, please, to the bottom, to the sting in the tail, it needs to be understood that as the people running the system and its diagnostics, only Fujitsu can provide evidence that the system is working correctly. All we can do is look at transactions, identify the dodgy ones, and provide some idea of what has gone on and who did it. So you might find that there has to be a lot of input on from Fujitsu on this, from a witness statement and court attendant aspects. I've spoken to Rod about this issue, and as we're in the throes of a 20% reduction, unless I'm able to keep 2 of the CM2 heads that I'm being asked to lose, I will not be in a position to undertake this work. I've asked Rod to speak to Peter C. about this and where we stand. Is that, Rod, you?
I think so, yeah.
What involvement did you have in this issue then?
I don't know. Tony Utting reported to me at that time.
Sorry, I missed that.
Tony Utting reported to me at that time.
Yes.
So the post office was undergoing one of several headcount reduction exercises at the time. I would have been talking to Tony about if a reduction, that it says 20% reduction here, if we've got to reduce our headcount by 20% in the investigations team, how do we structure ourselves to being able to best do the job that the team is there to do? How do we structure ourselves in the context of a 20% reduction? I guess, as you've said here, Tony's looks like he was bidding to take on some more work, but he can't take the work on if he hasn't got more heads, and he certainly can't take the work on if he's got less heads. So he must have escalated that to me to talk to Peter Corbett about.
And that's the reference to Peter C.
That would be Peter Corbett, yeah. So he'd be my boss, the finance director, and we'd have been having a conversation about, is it in the wider business interest that headcount reduction target applies at that level to this team?
Were you in favour of security taking on this additional role?
I think I probably would have been. I think that the sense of if a team is experienced in collating court files, then why wouldn't such a team with that experience ensure consistency across other functions? Now, I would always have the the civil law team and the criminal law team taking the lead on what's, guiding what needs to happen in there. But as somebody looking at process improvement in the organisation, if there's, in simplistic terms, if there's an opportunity for something that sounds similar, two things that sound similar to be done by the same team, that sounds like a sensible thing.
Was it the case that you viewed civil claims and criminal prosecutions as really two sides of the same coin, namely debt collection?
No, I think the thing here was that, and Tony's saying the compilation of the evidence, there's a similar collation process to be done. So this wasn't about debt recovery at all. And like the previous point where you said are the two things that kind of overlap, the concept of investigations and how one conducts it is going to lead to the creation of and the identification of a debt situation. That's not going to collect the debt.
Can we go over the page, please, to page 88? I think this is the reply. In fact, it predates it. It may be that the earlier email was a reply to this one. But in any event, Mr. Cole says to Messrs. Utting and Baines, with regard to the provision of an analyst to deal with civil litigation cases, could you confirm this is appropriate to your department? The steer from is that executive committee, the EC?
Yes.
Is that they are sympathetic to additional resource being provided. Can you recall whether this went up to the executive committee?
No, I can't. I mean, this indicates that it did. I can't recall whether it did, but it looks like I would have been speaking to Peter Corbett about it, and he was a member of the executive committee. I don't know whether I don't know what happened about how this went to the EC.
And was, again, this all part of a drive by the Post Office to recover more money from sub-postmasters?
No, this was about how a case is collated.
Can you, that can come down, thank you. Can you recall a phrase in this period, namely ARQ data?
I can remember the phrase, yeah.
What did you understand ARQ data to be?
My understanding is that I think ARQ data was some sort of extract of transactional data summaries at a branch level that would, I think, be in a post office branch. You could run a balance snapshot report and you could see something that showed what's all your transactions been in a week and what cash and stock you're left with at the end of the week. I think an ARQ report was a way of interrogating the system centrally to sort of recreate the same audit trail of what transactions had been done.
In broad terms, were you aware that the branch message store only retained data for a limited period and that it was sometimes necessary to obtain data from outside of that period from servers which retained it?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay. Can we look, please, at poll 303-9154? This is an email chain. It's from much later, outside of the period. It's got the subject line re East Ham, and then there's a branch code, and it includes email exchanges between Andrew Wynne and John Dutton. And broadly speaking, without going through the weeds of it, Mr. Wynne wanted to secure some ARQ data in respect of a transaction. There were some delays in the process, and John Dutton sought advice from Mr. Wynne. Can we look, please, at that top line? It says I'm from Mr. Wynne to Mr. Dutton. It looks like I'm going to have to spend some money to get the evidence. I need to talk to Rod. Would that be you?
Yes, I think so, yeah.
Back in 2003 to 6, did you have any role in authorising the expenditure of money to obtain ARQ data?
I don't think so.
When did... I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I think that... I think I became aware that there was a limitation on how much ARQ data could be pulled. I don't know whether it was when I was doing investigations or when I'd got in the FSC. At some point while I was there, I know the issue arose that the contract with Fujitsu, I think, limited how much ARQ data could be pulled, and that if an additional request that went over and above that limit was submitted, the post office was going to have to pay for that. I can't remember when I became aware of that, but certainly during my tenure there, at some point I found out and heard of ARQ, and at some point became aware that there was a limited access to it.
So it would have been outside the period when you were head of risk and compliance?
I'm not sure. I don't know whether it was in there or not.
Did you understand that there were divisions of data, some being obtainable from a system called Credence, some called standard ARQ data or just ARQ data, and some called enhanced ARQ data?
I was aware there was Credence. I don't recall enhanced ARQ as opposed to ARQ, but certainly I know Credence was different. Credence was a separate system.
What did you understand the difference to be between data obtainable from Credence and ARQ data?
I think that ARQ, I think, would have had was going into the Horizon data store and would have got all of the information that it could interrogate in there, whereas I think Credence was the same totality of transactional data harvested from the Horizon system and put into a separate database. But I think it was more about the transactional data rather than the balances of cash and stock on hand. So I think Credence would have been something that I think the genesis of it was more about sales MI data, sales management information data, and therefore I think it was more about transactions. So if Andy had a query from a sub-postmaster that he was looking into, that would have been a query most likely that would have involved a possibility of it being about the transactions and a possibility of it being about cash and stock on hand. So he would have wanted a totality of it, and it's possible that Credence didn't have that whole data set in it.
Was there a written policy for those conducting audits and investigations which set out when and in what circumstances they should obtain ARQ data?
I don't know.
Was it the case that ARQ data was obtained in all cases of an audit in which a sub-postmaster disputed that a loss was due to their conduct?
I don't know, but I would have thought it would have needed to be because of the time period, given that if there was local data only held for a certain period on the store within the counter before it all went onto online, onto the central system. So if there was a limitation on the time period when data was held at branch level, then I would have thought that the conversation about understanding the situation at the branch could well have begged questions going back days or weeks before the period that was still on hand there.
So would you agree that if ARQ data was not obtained and interrogated in all cases in which a sub-postmaster said that a loss was not attributable to their conduct, one could not confidently respond, the loss is due to you.
But I think if they, and I can't remember how long the data period, but say if it was 100 days of data that was held locally in the branch still, if the sub-postmaster said, or the colleague in a Crown office said, this issue happened 2 weeks ago, that would be within the 100 days of data that was held in the branch, and therefore there wouldn't be a need to pull ARQ data from preceding period because the colleague in the branch was challenging a more recent period. So I don't think I would expect that ARQ data would have to be pulled in every case, but if there was a lack of clarity about when an alleged issue had happened, or if a colleague in a branch said, this thing's been going on for a year, then I would have thought that ARQ data would need to be obtained for that earlier period.
So the answer to my question was it would need to be obtained if the relevant transactions occurred in a period only covered by ARQ data.
Yes, I would think so, yeah.
And was that, to your knowledge, the approach, that in all audits and investigations it was so obtained?
I don't know. That's what I'm thinking should have been the process. I wish I could say that I knew, but I don't.
Is that because of the frailties of memory, or because it was not something that you would have involved yourself in at the time?
Could have been either. I don't know. I can't remember.
Can we move forwards within this period? Ernst Young were the group auditors of Post Office Group at this time,
Right.
yes?
Yes.
And therefore they were the auditors for Post Office Limited.
Yes.
What liaison did you have in this period, 2003 to 2006, with Ernst Young?
In 2003 to 6, I think I would have met Ernst Young to share the information that was coming from, say, talking them through the Compliance and Risk Committee. I think if there had been a management letter point that related to things within my teams, then I would have met Ernst Young about that. And I think I probably possibly attended the audit planning meetings, which would have been ahead of the audit starting. And the audit closing meeting at that time, I think.
Were you the key contact between Ernst Young as head of risk and audit and compliance?
No. So although I had worked for Ernst Young before, the key contact for the audit, which I think would be standard in most companies, is the sort of the equivalent of a financial controller type role, who's somebody who's responsible for the financial processing. That person's typically the person who's got the lead role with the external auditors, and so I wasn't managing a processing team, and I wouldn't have been the lead person on the audit relationship, no.
As well as financial auditing, did Ernst Young produce service audit reports that concerned the Horizon processing environment?
Ernst Young would have done some testing of the IT environment in totality, which would have included Horizon, would have been part of that.
Was that in each of the years 2003 to 6?
Well, I think they would have done that in any audit in any year.
You said some testing of the IT as a whole, I think.
Yes.
What testing did Ernst Young do of the IT as a whole?
The IT as a whole would include the central finance system, which is the thing that's got accounts payable and accounts receivable going through it. So the testing would be of that. The testing, I think, would be things like what are the change control documentations for things that have happened in the year, and I think they would request the ability to run what would be called, and apologies that there's many different things that get called audit, but I think in a system you'd usually have an audit log where you could say what things have happened to that system during the year. The auditors could then look at that audit log and say, there was a software upgrade, there was an accounts payable module, for example, was added to the system, and where the audit, so if the audit log said there's been no changes to the system in the year, the auditors might say, well, we tested the system last time there was a change. Given that the audit log says there hasn't been any changes this year, there isn't a need to test something because there hasn't been a change from what we tested last time. But if there are things that have changed in the system, then they would look at some of the documentation around how was that change deployed in a controlled manner.
You said in that they would look at change control.
Yeah.
Would that include occasions on which Fujitsu had changed financial data within branch accounts?
Well, I understood that wasn't happening at the time. I think the audit process by change control wouldn't have been about that. Now, if they'd been aware of it, then they may have chosen to test it. But change control would have been about a change to the software script was being done. And they would have been looking at the change control, as I say, around the system has had a new module attached to it, or the system's been upgraded to Windows 10 instead of Windows 9 or something. Those are the kind of changes that would be the changes to the system, not changes of as in a transaction being entered in a system.
Would you expect this element of the audit to have established the extent to which Fujitsu had remote access to branch accounts?
I guess I'd expect that security and permission controls would be something that would be looked at. And so to understand, so I think one of the audit management letters that was issued did talk about SAP All Access, for example. So that's in the central SAP system, not in the Horizon system. But a user who's got SAP All Access, there'll be a log that says who are the people who've got SAP All Access. And then you might ask, well, is it appropriate that anybody's got SAP All Access? And if they have got it, what are they using it for? And let's run an audit log of what things have been done under that profile in the year. So I think that there would be an element to an information systems assurance review that would look at what types of profile of user are there, and what is the extent of
Their permissions.
Permissions, yes.
That document can come down from the screen, by the way. What was the, or was there a standard by which Ernst Young conducted this audit against, i.e. a measure, whether a domestic or international standard?
Yes, so auditors are subject to audit standards. So there are...
I'm thinking about specifically this aspect, whether there was a standard of assurance for financial processes or processes with a financial risk for an organisation.
No, I think the... I'm sure what phrase to use, like sort of the regulatory body for auditors in general has got particular themes of things where it would say objectivity or IT systems assurance. Here are principles that that one should follow in there. So there would be some, if you like, industry standards that would apply to any auditor who was looking at something to bear in mind in how they conducted an assurance review of an IT system.
And were you the recipient of the annual report that Ernst Young produced?
Yeah, so I think in that initial role, the first 3 years, I think I would have received the whole audit report for that. When my role became more specific in product and branch accounting, I don't think I did receive the full audit management letter, because some bits were irrelevant to me, such as an element about payroll was nothing to do with me.
Can we move forwards, please, to when you took over as head of products and branch accounting in 2006, September 2006 onwards? What did the role of head of P&BA involve when you took it over?
It involved the leadership of a team whose responsibilities were to ensure that a central ledger was maintained to pay post office clients the correct amount of money, or claim from them the correct amount of money, in respect of transactions that had been conducted in post office branches and through post office online services. So my team was about so there'd be an IT infrastructure that would feed Horizon data and website transactions through to what at one point in time was called the PolFS system, and I was responsible for making sure that my team was using the PolFS system to settle the right amounts to clients on time.
What was the structure of P&BA?
I think I had either 5 or 6 direct reports at different times during my tenure there.
And what were they called, managers?
Yes, so they'd be senior managers in the in my team. Yes. So.
And how many people as a whole worked in P&BA?
I think when I joined there was round about. So I think when I took it over in 2006, I think there were about 240 people.
When you arrived in P&BA, it was just as the Impact project was rolling out through what we know as Release S90. Do you remember that?
There were lots of S's. I can't remember which. There was S80, S90. I can't remember which one was which. But I think when I joined it, I think Impact had been deployed, and I was joining some months after Impact had happened.
And so never mind the release number.
Yeah.
You remember that when you joined, it was just as the Impact programme was being rolled out?
Yes, yeah.
The inquiry's heard from a witness saying that this project led to, quote, a lot of issues flying around, and products and branch accounting, which was based in the same building as him, he was aware that there was a lot of stress coming from there that needed resolving concerning feeds from branches, things falling into the wrong accounts, and the accounts not functioning as planned. Does that does that ring any bells to you of the situation when you arrived in P&BA?
Yes.
Did it go beyond what that witness, Mr. Wynne, has identified?
Well, I think he's referred to that in about 2009 or 10 and in his transcript. So Impact was deployed in 2005 or 2006. I think we had a lot of issues that ran right through that whole period, and the sort of the genesis of the issues at the start of it were you've got a load of files that you're loading into the system. So there was an old system called CBDB and Class, I think it was called. We put this SAP system in. The data out of the old system needed transferring into the new system, and it was an enormous amount of data. And then continuity of the interfaces from branches needed to continue, such that we'd got all the stuff out of the old system migrated over, and knew that the branches were going to be plugged in from day one for their information feeding into the system. I think on the day that Impact migration happened, I think there were file load issues that meant the whole of the data out of the previous system was put in, and then it had to be pulled out again, and then it had to be put in again. And there was a constant issue for product and branch accounting that the enormity of the data that was coming out of the whole of the post office network meant that you had to stay on top of processing a day in a day. And it was a heck of a lot of data that you were processing in the day in respect of yesterday's transactions. There was a lot of anxiety about if we've got to keep backing out data files and putting them in again, that itself adds to the overnight cycle of things that get on. And so we don't want to get in a position where we're not going to be able to continue processing a day in a day's data as well as sorting out the migration stuff. So that caused a lot of headache at first. The migration data was put into the system. A day in a day data was managed. So we don't think we did manage to avoid getting in a position of not being having 2 days data to process and never catching up. But the Polyfest system, when it went in, users were finding it quite slow. So there was an enormous amount of data. An individual in my team might have responsibility for a particular product. So you might go into a post office branch and do a savings product, for example. There'd be a ledger centrally for that savings product, and people were looking at egg timers. They were trying to interrogate something and they just couldn't interrogate it because of egg timers. So we were livid with the kind of IT environment of the egg timers that we'd got on there. That was causing a lot of angst in the team that Andy would have seen and heard amongst his colleagues in the team. And in the following following years, we continued. We were receiving an enormous amount of data, an enormous load of individual files from branches and cash centres every day, and from corporate clients who were sending us files. Sometimes the IT interfaces got slowed down and a particular file somehow didn't come in, and there'd be an alert that would tell us that file hadn't come in. But if a file didn't come in, we couldn't do all our normal processing on time. We'd have to wait until that file was in order to be able to match transactions, which might lead to a conversation with the branch about transaction correction. So we were frustrated that sometimes there were file load timing issues. There's cases that some of the documents in the witness packs refer to about files loaded the wrong way round. That was a frustration, and there was a controlled way to back the file out and put the file in again. But frankly, my team, we were trying to be up to date for as much as we could possibly do it, to have as close to real-time conversations with some postmasters as we could, and having prompt and reliable settlement arrangements with our corporate clients. And we were furious that we were having issues in the infrastructure that were slowing down our ability to do those routines. And that's the sort of stuff that Andy was, the vibes he was feeling from members of my team, including me.
Did you draw from all of that basket of serious concerns any views as to the competence and professionalism of Fujitsu?
My view from the correspondence that I had with Fujitsu was that they took seriously each topic that was coming forward and were responding in a what seemed like a sensible manner to the particular issues that we identified. However, there were too many of them. So I had a concern that there were too many file load issues that were going on. Each one of them, I think, was handled in an appropriate manner. But why does this keep happening?
What did you answer that question with? Why does this keep happening?
So I asked, we had several different heads of IT during my tenure of being there, but at some points during that, I would have, and I did, say, this is impairing the ability of my team to do its job on a timely basis. We'll do it right, and we'll be a certain time period delayed in doing the job correctly, but it's not good enough that we're being delayed by technology issues. But I understood at the same time that the post office was going through an enormous IT transformation, So it was reinventing its network, working with different people to run the network, going online. It had entered financial services, entered telephony, broadband, home phone, a load of new products that were being deployed through branches and through its websites. It was deploying an IT tower strategy that I don't understand the detail of it, but going from a kind of a layered IT architecture to a verticalised one, which was enormous. And it was going to lead us to a situation of being able to, if we needed to remove an IT supplier and put another one in, I think the tower strategy was going to take us to a place where you could change your IT suppliers more easily, because every 4 or 5 years you probably do need to change suppliers sometimes on things. But I think the enormity of all of the transformations that were going on across the whole of the IT estate meant that there was limited resource to kind of respond as fast as you'd like to some of the issues that were going on.
So you didn't draw any negative views as to Fujitsu's competence and professionalism?
No, I don't think I drew negative views about their competence and professionalism. I was frustrated about capacity.
I'm going to turn now to a report that you wrote in August 2010, the so-called Ismay report. Can we look at it, please? It's at poll 302 6572. We can see that it was written by you. We can see that from the top right-hand side from Rod Ismay, Head of Product and Branch Accounting.
Yes. And
we can see the date of it. It's the 2nd of August 2010, and it's, I think, 36 pages long.
The additional bundle that I've received has got the page settings right on it, so it's 20 pages long. We had a Microsoft Windows upgrade at some point, which threw out the page numbering of all the documents that had been written pre that Windows upgrade. So this looks like an untidy version of it.
Okay.
The actual version, which is in the additional bundle, is 20 pages long, and the page flow is much more sensible.
I understand. Who commissioned you to write the report?
Dave Smith.
And what was Dave Smith's job at that time?
So he was managing director
Of
Post Office Limited.
What were the terms of reference for the writing of the report?
I don't think there was a written terms of reference for it, but the terms of it were to understand the reasons why Post Office should be able to take assurance about the Horizon system. What are all those reasons of positives? So this was obviously an ongoing situation where some allegations were being made about Horizon. Dave, I think, was relatively new to Post Office. I think he was only managing director for about a year. I think he came from somewhere in Royal Mail and went back to somewhere in Royal Mail. In the period that he was there, I think that given the comments that he was hearing, allegations, this was a question to me to say, well, you know, what's the counter arguments to this?
You would have understood that the task you were being asked to perform was a very significant one, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Why were the terms of reference for it not reduced to writing?
Well, it should have been in hindsight, and I've commented in my witness statement on some things that in hindsight should have been different. I think.
Why does it take hindsight to realise that the writing of a report of very great significance ought to have written terms of reference?
I think, sadly, because in the heat of the moment, there was a need to construct this report, and it was quite clear. It was quite clear to me that Dave was saying lots of the reasons to take assurance, and that in itself was a pretty simple scope. What are the reasons to take assurance? And that's what I've listed out. I've had conversations with lots of people. I've listed those out on the most of the pages of the report.
You said that it was constructed in the heat of the moment. How long did it take you to write the report?
I think it was a couple of weeks.
Was it hot during all of that 2 weeks?
It was hot because there were so many things going on in the post office. So we were probably on another precursor to gearing up for Royal Mail privatisation. I'd got lean process improvement reviews going on in my team. The business was always restructuring. I'd got headcount reduction targets. I'd got all the file load issues that we've just alluded to in the previous session. My job was red hot with lots of things going on in it, and this was a hugely important piece of work in the context of a really challenging period of all sorts of organisational changes going on.
But it was done in such a rush that there wasn't time to reduce the terms of reference to writing. That seems odd in hindsight, I realise, but no, I think I felt at the time that the question was quite clear. Please, can you list out the reasons for assurance? And to an extent, I'm not sure that needs a terms of reference beyond it. What are the reasons for assurance? Well, I've listed them out. And so you weren't given free rein to write what you wished. You were directed only to include reasons that gave reassurance.
Yes, yeah. So I appreciate that looking at this document cold, it could look imbalanced.
But that was the task you were given.
That was the task that I was given, was to what are the reasons for assurance. I wasn't given the task of what are the allegations and can you investigate them. That was not the remit of this.
You were only asked to present one side of the coin.
Yes.
If we just scroll down, please.
I don't wish to be crude, but some people call that a whitewash. Do you think that's what you're engaged in?
No, I think the allegations had been made, but somebody like Dave coming into the organisation wasn't hearing and he was finding his feet in the organisation.
But just telling him one side of the story was hardly educating him, was it?
Well, that was what he asked for.
So that's why I was a bit blunt. Yeah. Was he asking, in effect, for information which would allow him to bat away the criticisms of Horizon?
Well, I think he was asking for information in order so that he could get a balanced view because, yeah.
All right.
You told us that you were asked to write a report that gave reassurance and that presented one side of the coin. Can you see in the third paragraph on the page there, it reads, "This paper has been compiled as an objective internal review of Pol's processes around branch accounting."
Yes.
If you were asked to present only one side of the coin, in what sense was the report objective?
It was objective about the processes and controls that were in place there, but it was incomplete in that it didn't tackle the allegation areas. But I think it was an objective assessment of the areas where there were positives.
Do you understand objective to mean based on real facts, not influenced by personal beliefs or feelings, or not constrained by a predetermined set of criteria?
Yeah, yes. Yeah.
This report was none of those things, was it?
I think it was an objective conversation with people about processes, controls, recruitment, training, opportunities to call centres. The report doesn't comment on the effectiveness of those. It wasn't an audit. So it's an objective list of things that each team said were the reasons to take assurance. It is incomplete in that it doesn't have the negatives, but I wasn't asked to collate those. But I think it is an objective listing of the other arguments.
Can we look please at page 31 of the report? This is one of the appendices to the report. And in this printed version, it's a 4.5-page document produced by Gareth Jenkins. Can you see that?
Yes, I can, yes.
You relied on this report from Mr. Jenkins in order to reach your conclusions, didn't you?
Yes, so I don't think I spoke to Gareth during the course of putting this report together. I think I spoke with colleagues, and so I've named people on the front of it, and I spoke to people within the post office who were part of their teams, and somebody's provided this as part of that.
In what sense did you think that asking the person responsible for designing and maintaining the system, whether the system that he had designed and maintained had integrity, was in any way objective?
Because I understand what you're saying there.
Can you answer the question then?
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking how to answer the question there. So, the people separate to Gareth who I asked the question of were telling me that it was reliable, so people within our own IT team. Gareth is saying the same here. Short of doing an audit, I don't know what else I could have done other than take those assertions from individuals. Now, I think the report should have said these are untested assertions, as in untested by me during the course of collating this report, and my report doesn't say that.
Why not?
It should have done.
Yes, but why didn't it?
Because I was so busy putting the thing together, there were just, at the end of a report there's always things that you think in hindsight I could have done that in it, and at the time it didn't occur to me that it needed to have got that statement in it.
It didn't occur obvious to you to say, I've asked the man who's got a vested interest in saying that the system he designs and helps to maintain is working well, is an untested assertion by him?
No, it didn't. It didn't, no.
You tell us, if we just move to paragraph 39 of your witness statement, please, which is on page 10. You say regarding, and then you give a character string, which is the document we're looking at. That's the report. Regarding the report, I confirm that I did write this report after being asked by David Smith to conduct a review in light of the challenges being made about the system. It was a summary of existing conclusions. Yes?
Yes, yes.
If we can go back to the report, please. Poll 302. Thank you. And then look at page 1. 3 paragraphs in. Where here does it say this report is restricted to being a summary of existing conclusions, not a fresh investigation?
It doesn't.
Why not, if that's the task you were being asked to perform?
Because at the time when I wrote this, I thought that was, as I thought through what have I collated here, that was what I felt at the time was the description of the reports that I'd compiled.
You've rebadged the report up in your witness statement as just a collation or summary of existing documents, haven't you?
And it is.
Well, why doesn't it say that in the report itself? This is just a paper exercise of writing down what's already known.
It was a paper exercise of writing down what was already known but which had not been collated in a form that the managing director had got any kind of summation of all those reasons. So, yes, it was a paper exercise, but given that nobody had put together such a list before, at the time it was considered quite helpful to have collated that list of things there.
It says something different, doesn't it, in this third paragraph? It's been compiled as an objective internal review. That reads as if you've applied your mind to it, doesn't it? If you were just gathering bits of paper together, you wouldn't need to say that, would you?
No, so that's the wrong wording, yes.
Were you trying to give the wrong impression there
No,
to a reader?
no.
How long did it take to write the report itself?
I think it was going on over a couple of weeks.
Was that separate from the time it took you to review material and gather material?
I
Or
think
was the whole process a 2-week
I
process?
think the whole process was a couple of weeks, yeah.
Did anyone assist you with the task of undertaking the review?
No, but I met and talked to lots of different people, and some things in here, like there's some tables towards the end of the document, and Gareth Jenkins' report, some of the pages in there are copies and pastes of things that people sent to me. I have then pasted them into this document, and it's only me that's typed the things that's in this document, but that came out of lots of conversations with lots of other people.
And so we should understand, other than when you've cut something in to the report, whether by way of table or appendix, that these are your words and your words alone.
That is my typing alone, but it will be phrases that may have come from some of my conversations with the people that I talked to in collating it.
But you take responsibility for what's in here.
I take responsibility for having typed what's in here. If I've typed something that was a statement given to me by somebody else, I don't take responsibility for the veracity of what that individual has said to me, but I take responsibility for having asked them a question, they've given me some answers.
And you've typed it up?
I've typed it up.
Are you reducing your role to that of a typist?
No, because I think I had lots of questions that I asked people in order to be able to put together and structure something in a sense of looking at control systems, escalation processes. There's a kind of structure to this document, but then that collates lots of information that other individuals have given to me.
Can we look at the paragraph headed Executive Summary? And in the second sentence, it says, "We remain satisfied that this money was due to theft in the branch. We do not believe that the account balances against which the audits were conducted were corrupt." Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
You've used the word "we" twice in that sentence, haven't you?
I have.
Who's the "we" in that sentence?
That is me speaking as we, the Post Office, and we, the Post Office, being represented by the individuals that I've talked to, being a voice from different functions, and collectively that we, of all those people, were remaining satisfied, as it says here.
Does the fact that you've written in this way reflect a desire to set out a corporate position?
It was setting out to Dave a we that reflected that all the teams that I work with to collate this were satisfied. So it was an assurance to Dave who'd asked for what are all those reasons of positives. I'm saying I've talked to all these other people, and we, being all those people and me, are feeding this back to you. We remain satisfied. Here, Dave, is that summary.
The people that you spoke to had various fingers in the pie to do with systems, processes, controls, IT, network, audit, security, legal.
Yes.
Did each and every one of them say to you, "I remain satisfied that all of the money missing is due to theft in the branch. I do not believe that the account balances against which the audits were conducted were corrupt"?
No, that phrase is my summation of all of the conversations with people.
It's you speaking there.
That is me summarising what all those different teams have said to me. That exact wording is not something that each team out there used. However, all of the teams that I spoke to said, in whatever different types of words it was, that they were happy that Horizon worked.
And it's, so that I'm clear, every single person whom you consulted remained satisfied that money was due to theft, money missing was due to theft in the branch, and every single person you consulted was of the view that the audits were not corrupt.
Right, let me break that down. So it's a subset of a yes, this answer here. So when I spoke to people in the IT team, they'd be satisfied that Horizon worked. Somebody in the IT team wouldn't be able to take a view about was it external theft or internal theft, all money that had gone down the back of the drawer. So the IT people wouldn't be able to take a view about was it theft, but the IT people would say, I was happy about the system. Whereas another team that I spoke to, who might be a colleague in the network team, they wouldn't be able to take a view about was the system robust because they're not the IT team, but they would have a view from the audit evidence that had come out that would say, well, we're satisfied it looks like theft. So different people that I spoke to would have got assurance about a different piece of this jigsaw, but collectively that whole jigsaw distills into this phrase here.
The way to write it, then, if that's the truth, is to say I've consulted with disparate parts of the organisation, aggregating the information that they've given me. I am satisfied that the money is missing due to theft, etc. Isn't it?
I could have structured it to say I've consulted these organisations, and based on what they're saying, I'm satisfied that collectively all these teams are assured about this. I don't think I could have said something that says I am satisfied because I've placed some reliance on what another person said about the area of their expertise in there.
If you didn't test what any of the people were telling you, you personally couldn't be satisfied in any way at all, could you?
Well, I haven't audited it. This wasn't an audit.
No.
No.
So you couldn't vouchsafe for anything they told you?
So perhaps the phrase "we remain satisfied," perhaps there's an alternative to "we."
But it means they should be the phrase.
Not they.
Some people I've spoken to, they are satisfied that.
Yeah, yeah.
So why did you write it this way? Are you not trying here to set out a corporate position to give reassurance to the reader that the entire organisation is satisfied that this loss of money is down to thieving postmasters and is nothing to do with data integrity?
No.
That's what you're doing, isn't it?
No, it's not.
Why did you use these words?
Because it's very easy to look at a report in hindsight and think that could have been worded differently, but at the time that felt like the right
This
word.
isn't playing with words. This is examining the natural meaning of what you wrote. And I'm asking you, why did you write it in this way?
Because that was how that felt like the right wording for the assurances that I was getting from all of the teams at the time.
Why were you picked to write this report?
I think because the nature of my role in product and branch accounting meant that I'd got quite an overarching view of lots of things in different teams, not necessarily having the expertise in lots of different teams, but a level of understanding of what was going on in different teams. And I think because Dave went out to different parts of the organisation to meet people as he joined as part of his welcome and introduction. He came to Chesterfield at some point. I think because we would have talked about branch accounting and client accounting then, he probably sensed that I'd got a breadth of understanding in order to be able to work with people to collate this report. I don't know why he didn't ask for an auditor or somebody else to do it, but I think...
We're going to come to that in a moment, probably after
I'm sure,
lunch.
yeah.
Do you know whether any directors were involved in the decision to pick you?
No, I don't know.
Do you know whether your selection was discussed at board level?
No, I don't.
Can we look briefly before lunch then at to whom the report was sent and go to the top of the page, please? There's a distribution list with 14 names on it.
Yeah.
There are 3 direct addressees and 11 on the CC list. The 3 direct addressees first. Mr. Smith, David Smith, the managing director. Was this report sent to him because he had commissioned it?
Yes.
Was he therefore the main addressee?
Yes.
Was there any discussion between you and him before the report was written as to what he would do with the report once it was written?
No, I don't think so. I think recollection is that this was about he needed a collation of the counter arguments, and I thought this was part of his gathering understanding of that.
Did you not know the use to which it might be put?
No, I didn't. So when I think probably I came down to London one day, and Angela took me round to meet some different people in the organisation.
And by that do you mean Angela van den Bogen?
Yeah. So I went and I think we'd got some new people who joined in London, and
Who were they?
So the chair, so Alice Perkins. So she got this report. I wasn't aware that I hadn't expected that was going to be another audience for the report.
Why didn't you expect that it would go up to board level?
Well, I probably should have.
Why didn't you, but now realise that you should?
Because I was focused on producing something for the managing director who requested that. I was working on how do I best summarise all this to respond to the question that he's asked.
Does not the audience for which you're writing the report and the use to which it might be put condition the task that you undertake?
Yes, it should, yeah.
If I'm writing a memo to Mr. Blake, I might write it in one way. If it's to Sir Wynne, I might be more careful.
Yeah.
Did that cross your mind?
No, I think the way in which I've constructed this, I didn't think about who else it might go to, but I would always seek to write something in an objective manner. And obviously, you understandably, you're questioning how objective it is, but I would always seek to write something in a way that would I be happy if somebody else read this? Well,
Are you happy now?
No, I'm not. I'm not happy now. No. And I've said in my witness statements things that I think it should have had terms of reference. It should have had attribution of things in there. There's some of the phrases that I've used, like you're probably going to ask about the phrase compassion that's in there. I certainly wouldn't kind of use that phrase again that was in there. But at the time, with many, many different things that I was working on, this, which I burnt the midnight oil to summarise this after all the conversations I had with people, this felt like a suitable wording that I would have been content if it was shared with somebody else, but I didn't think through who else might it go to.
Did you expect it to go to the board?
No, it's while I expected it to go to Dave. I'm not surprised it's gone to the board. I didn't think through, is it going to go to the board, but I'm not surprised it went to them.
The second person on the direct distribution list is Mike Moores, the finance director. Why did you send it to him?
Well, he's my boss. I think he should be a recipient of something that I'm producing, and I think he was involved when Dave asked for it. I think Mike would have consented to my time being redirected to the collation of this, given the number of other things that I'd got going on. Was
Mr. Moores involved in setting the terms of reference for the piece of work that you produced?
No. The unwritten, really short terms of reference, which was list out the reasons, was something that Dave asked for, and I presume Mike was happy that was an appropriate thing to ask for.
So he was only involved to the extent in giving consent for the abstraction of your time?
Yes, and I think Mike, again, I don't think had been in Post Office Limited for long at that time. So whilst the report has included him as a two in the circulation list, he wasn't somebody who'd got sort of direct input to make on this, because he was relatively new to the organisation as well, I think, at that time.
The third direct addressee is Mike Young, the Chief Technical and Services Officer. Yeah. Why was the report sent to him?
I did speak to him during the course of collating this, and he and I did talk about the kind of structuring of the document in terms of controls, training, just kind of thinking. So my conversation with him were about the building blocks of the report, of those four sort of main areas that the report's structured under.
Did he see a draft of the report?
Probably.
Did anyone else see a draft of the report?
I think probably all this audience. I'd like to think that I would have copied all of them in order that they could comment if it wasn't a fair summary of the things that they'd shared in there. So the question that you asked earlier about the we, I think I would have shared this with people before finalising it, and therefore that would add to the validity of it being a we, given that it would have gone through a kind of a visibility of the draft of it.
So you think there ought to exist, rather than this final version that we've got, a draft or drafts that have been distributed to the 14 people on this list?
Well, the may.
You think there may?
Yeah.
And that would have been their opportunity to say, no, we disagree, and that therefore justifies you writing up, we are satisfied that.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. So that's an appropriate moment. I've got about another hour on the document,
Yeah.
so can we break until after lunch, please?
Yeah, obviously you may have lunch with whoever you choose, but if it's with someone who knows about the evidence in your case, don't discuss your evidence, all right? Thank you.
Thank you.